Kubrick's The Shining unfolds less like a typical horror film and more like a labyrinth of meaning and imagery. On its release in 1980, some dismissed it for lacking traditional haunted house shocks. Yet over time it has drawn viewers, critics and scholars back into the unsettling void of the Overlook Hotel. The film seems to demand endless revisits, as though anyone who watches becomes trapped in a cycle of analysis and reinterpretation. What gives it this power? What hidden design lies behind the dense network of symbols and details scattered across nearly every frame? Kubrick himself never offered definitive answers, choosing instead to let the mystery remain intact. In that refusal, the film becomes less about finding a single interpretation and more about the obsession created in the search itself. Unlike many of his other works, even 2001, A Space Odyssey, The Shining is uniquely structured as a mirror for the audience's own perceptions. On a macro level, it isn't about decoding individual clues, but about being pulled into the repetition, fixation, and circularity that the film embodies. That's why it endures, not as a puzzle with a solution, but as a cinematic maze, one that rewards every return visit with new paths, new meanings, and new dead ends. Kubrick's The Shining can be read as a Gothic story of family collapse and violence, but the real intrigue lies in the way he toys with genre boundaries. Loosely adapted from Stephen King's 1977 bestseller, the film begins with a sweeping, almost cosmic prologue, reminiscent of 2001: A Space Odyssey. A helicopter glides over the Rocky Mountains, capturing vast landscapes, while Wendy Carlos's ominous electronic arrangement of Dies Irae, a medieval funeral chant tied to Judgment Day, sets an unsettling tone. From the start, the Torrance family, Jack, Wendy, and their young son Danny, seems fated for condemnation by forces that feel supernatural, mythic, and historical all at once. At the Overlook Hotel, where Jack has taken a winter caretaker job to focus on his writing, his sanity begins to unravel. The cause is left ambiguous, isolating cabin fever, alcoholism, malevolent spirits, or perhaps a combination. The hotel's phantoms coax him toward violence, urging him to murder his family with an axe. Danny, gifted with psychic foresight, manages to escape with Wendy, leaving Jack to freeze in the labyrinthine hedge maze. What lingers isn't a neat resolution, but an unsolved puzzle. A film full of haunting imagery, cryptic symbols, and contradictions. It's at once imperfect in its plotting, yet meticulously crafted, feeding the notion that Kubrick's true design was to leave viewers trapped in its mystery. When Kubrick set out to adapt Stephen King's novel, he brought in Diane Johnson, a novelist and professor of Gothic literature at Berkeley, to collaborate on the screenplay. Together, they stripped away much of King's layered backstory and themes, instead using the novel's bare framework to explore Kubrick's own obsessions. The film still bears the hallmarks of Gothic storytelling: a sprawling haunted building, spectral figures, hidden family tensions, and a child with uncanny powers. Yet Kubrick leaves out many of King's details. We're given no insight into Jack Torrance's past before his arrival in Colorado, nor much history about the Overlook itself. The hotel manager, Ullman, Barry Nelson, casually notes that the building was constructed on an Indian burial ground, and recounts how a previous caretaker, Charles Grady, murdered his family one winter. Later, when Grady reappears as a ghostly butler played by Philip Stone, he introduces himself as Delbert Grady, an inconsistency that fans have long debated. Was it a mistake or a hidden clue? Much of The Shining operates in this murky space where nothing feels fully explained. King's book fits comfortably into Gothic tradition, but Kubrick twists those conventions. Rather than leaning on shadows and atmosphere like earlier Gothic films, Vampire 1932, The Innocents 1961, he lights his film with a cold, clinical brightness. The effect makes the horror less about ghosts and more about the terror lurking inside a husband or father. As critic Pauline Kael once quipped, "Who wants to see evil in daylight through a wide-angle lens?" Kubrick's answer was, everyone. What could have been a straightforward Gothic ghost story about a family in a cursed house instead becomes, in Kubrick's hands, a nightmare of domestic dysfunction. He zeroes in on Jack's alcoholism, cruelty, and misogyny as the real disease eating away at the Torrance family. By contrast, King, who was wrestling with his own struggles with addiction while writing the novel, seemed to sympathize more with the fallen father figure at its core. Kubrick, however, never gives Jack that grace. From the start, he paints him as the danger. Notice how Jack brushes aside Ullman's warning about the Grady murders, joking that Wendy is just a ghost story nut, though the film never shows him actually telling her about the hotel's bloody past. In the interview, Jack comes across as affable and eager, but at home his tone curdles into sarcasm and disdain, especially toward Wendy and Danny. He mocks his wife with degrading remarks, calling her the old sperm bank, while Wendy, locked in codependency, absorbs the abuse. Later, when a doctor examines Danny after his seizure, a supernatural red flag, Wendy recounts Jack's past violence with the resignation of someone conditioned to make excuses, repeating his empty apologies to smooth over the doctor's suspicions. The real threat in The Shining isn't the ghosts, it's Jack. Unlike many Gothic tales, and unlike King's book, the horror here doesn't come from external spirits, but from within the family itself. This flips the usual horror formula where shared terror binds families together, The Exorcist in 1973 or Poltergeist in 1982. Instead, Kubrick's vision follows the darker current of films like Rosemary's Baby, 1968, where the family unit itself turns predatory, and safety at home is the last thing anyone can expect. To place The Shining in its late 1970s horror context, it arrived on the heels of a wave of stories about children with uncanny abilities. Audiences had already seen the psychic twins in Robert Mulligan's The Other, 1972, Disney's family-friendly Escape to Witch Mountain, 1975, the destructive telekinetics in Brian De Palma's Carrie, 1976, and The Fury, 1978, and the bizarre mutant children in David Cronenberg's The Brood, 1979. King's novel fit right into that trend. Danny could sense his parents' thoughts and summon Dick Halloran when he needed rescue, while the Overlook itself was portrayed as a sentient, vampiric presence that fed on Danny's psychic energy, corrupting Jack to get to him. Kubrick, though, strips much of this away. In his version, Danny's gift isn't clearly defined. There's no neat explanation of shining. We only see fragmented visions, conveyed through disjointed cuts and subliminal flashes. Even Tony, the little boy who lives in Danny's mouth, is left ambiguous. Is he an imaginary companion or a manifestation of Danny's gift? Kubrick doesn't say. Danny simply absorbs images and impressions, but neither he nor the audience is ever able to fully decode them. By removing King's elaborate system of psychic cause and effect, Kubrick renders the entire story more mysterious and unsettling. The Overlook resists explanation. Danny's powers are unknowable. What remains is a haze of suggestion, forcing viewers to fill in the blanks themselves. This feels deliberate, as though Kubrick believed that withholding clarity would make the film's horror linger longer, less about answers, more about the nagging, unshakable questions.